working Australians, unlike the mob opposite.
In accordance with Standing Order 43, the time for members' statements has concluded, and I call the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I inform the House that the member for Barton is on leave today and questions relating to the Indigenous Australians portfolio will be answered by the member for Kingston.
Questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Before the election, the Prime Minister promised that if he was elected, he would deliver a $275 cut to electricity bills, cheaper mortgages for Australians and higher wages. Given the budget now says power prices will rise 56%, a typical mortgage now costs $1,140 more a month and wages are falling far behind inflation. When will the government fess up and apologise for misleading Australians?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. As loath as I am to make a partisan point at question time, Mr Speaker, I normally try and rise above such matters, as honourable members know. But the honourable member opposite leaves me no choice, Mr Speaker. The honourable member talks about budgets and energy price rises, and I feel obliged to remind the honourable member of the evidence of the Treasury Secretary before Senate estimates this week, when he said the increase in prices this financial year reflects the increases in the default market offers published in May by the Australian Energy Regulator and associated market dynamics. Those published in May. In late May, Mr Speaker, as it happens. They were meant to be published in early May, but there was an intervention by the member for Hume. And the member for Hume previously denied doing that. He said, "No, I didn't." And can I say that the government had...
The Minister for Climate Change and Energy, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, I'm trying to call the manager. When the House comes to order, I'll hear his point of order.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. On relevance and question time, you've previously directed a minister to be relevant to the question, where the minister has strayed and begun talking about the record of the former government. And the minister here again is up to it, and he should be directed back to this very tightly drafted question.
The question included commitments before the election, cut to bills, rise in wages, mortgage rates. It was quite a broad question in the topics covered, but I'm going to invite the minister to return back to the question, and I give him the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I also recall that it mentioned the need to apologise, and there are some people who need to apologise, Mr Speaker. There are some people who need to apologise. The member for Hume originally denied hiding the price increase. This week, or last week, he did finally admit it. He told the Senate, he told the National Press Club, and I quote, "I did, as was recommended by the Industry Department and by the regulator, so it's what they wanted." He's finally admitted doing it, but he's thrown his department under the bus, his former department, blaming the bureaucrats. Now, I have little doubt as to why he did that, because the member for Hume was minister for some time. On the day that the member for Hume became the energy minister, the price of energy in the national energy market was $92.63 a megawatt hour. On election day, his last day in office, it was $241 a megawatt hour, Mr Speaker. Talk about the need to apologise. Those opposite should apologise for 10 years of denial and delay and dysfunction, and they should apologise for the dishonesty at the end as well.
Order. There is far too much noise on my right, the Minister for the Environment and Water and the Minister for Infrastructure. I give the call to the member for Blair.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs and Cyber Security. How is the government responding to the Medibank data being leaked?
Give the call to the Minister for Home Affairs and the Minister for Cyber Security.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Blair for his question. Yesterday, I indicated to the parliament that the consequences of the Medibank hack were likely to get worse, and today those fears have been realised. And I want to say particularly to the women whose private health information has been compromised overnight. As the Minister for Cybersecurity, but more importantly as a woman, this should not have happened, and I know this is a really difficult time. I want you to know that as a parliament and as a government we stand with you. You are entitled to keep your health information private, and what has occurred here is morally reprehensible and it is criminal. I want to provide some information to the parliament and to Australians this afternoon about victim support. Cyber hacks each have their own character, and the concerns and issues that citizens will face, even in this one instance, have many variations. Some will need technical questions answered, some will be victims of crime, some will need health support, and much more vulnerable citizens who are affected here are going to require intensive case management. As well as the focus on enforcement and prevention of harm, much of the work of the National Coordination Mechanism over recent weeks has been stepping out how this situation may unfold and for different communities of victims what support and services they will need to be provided. Now, our focus as a parliament is on Medicare stepping up on this, but of course there are requirements here too for government. We are very focused on how to make this easy and simple for citizens who are affected to access. I don't want Australians to have to circulate 14 government departments or areas of Medibank in order to get the support that they deserve and need. I spoke with the Medibank CEO today twice with Minister Shorten and Minister Butler, and I made it abundantly clear of the expectations of the Australian community about what this company owes to its customers, given what has transpired here. They owe that people who need help are able to get it. Medibank is providing a clean one-stop shop which will help refer citizens to support, whether that support is being provided by Medibank itself, a state and federal government, a state or federal police force. And it is important that that support is scalable. And I received the assurance from Medibank today that if a large data dump occurs, they are fully ready to provide services when and if they are needed to Australians who need them. We're supporting that work, including by Services Australia, who through their minister are making their staff available to sit with the Medibank staff in this. I want to say just finally, in particular with the Deputy Prime Minister and the Attorney General, I want to pay tribute to the work of the Australian Federal Police and the Australian Signals Directorate, and I want the scumbags behind this attack to know that the smartest and toughest people in this country are coming after you.
Give the call to the member for McPherson.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. As the Medibank crisis deepens and millions of Australians' personal health data is at risk of exposure, can the Minister inform the House of any specific actions taken, as opposed to just expressing sympathy, to crack down on cyber criminals?
Order.
Why has the Minister not taken up the Coalition's ransomware bill introduced into Parliament over a month ago, which would establish tougher penalties for those who engage in cybercrime?
Order. I give the Minister for Climate Change and Energy will cease interjecting. I'm going to give the call to the Minister for Home Affairs and Cybersecurity.
Yeah, thank you so much, Speaker, and let me make a few points. It is so regrettable that at a moment like this, the opposition wants to politicise the pain and suffering of Australians.
Order. Members on my left.
I am genuinely shocked. I have been a member of Parliament for 9 years, and usually in moments like this, we have a rare time to come together as a parliament to help people. And I just cannot believe that people who are suffering, who have had personal information about them revealed, that you are trying to politicise this. I'm just genuinely shocked. Now, let me say a few things.
The member for McPherson has asked her question.
Let me say a few things.
Order. Order.
Speaker.
The Minister will resume her seat for a moment. There is far too much noise. The member for McPherson has asked her question, was heard in silence, out of the respect she deserves, and I'm going to give the call to the Minister for Home Affairs and Cybersecurity. I'd like the House to listen to what the Minister is saying.
Speaker, as I say, greatly regrettable that the opposition has decided to politicise this, but let me go with them. I want to say this to the opposition. This is an incredibly embarrassing question from someone who was the Minister for Cybersecurity 5 months ago. This problem did not begin on the 22nd of May. And I would say to those opposite, I have said repeatedly that we are about 5 years behind where we need to be on cybersecurity. And do you know who were the ministers over the previous 5 years? It was the Minister for Home Affairs, and it was the person who sits in the opposition leader's chair.
That's right.
Now, we would like to collaborate with those opposite to fix what is an urgent national problem that is in part their creation. And I would invite them to come together with us and work as a team. And if you would like to ask further questions on this matter, I would welcome them, because we know quite a bit about the record of the previous Minister for Home Affairs, her treatment of public servants on election day. That demonstrates her commitment to national security issues in this country. Now, we take a different approach. We are trying to fight for our citizens, and we are trying to improve this for our country, and we invite those opposite to come and join us whenever they're ready to stop shamelessly politicising every issue in this parliament, which they did relentlessly for almost a decade. And where did it get us?
Order. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for McNamara.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Today, a Joint Select Committee tabled a unanimous report recommending the government's bill to establish a National Anti-Corruption Commission be passed. How soon can Australians expect this important commission to be up and running?
I give the call to the Attorney-General. The Deputy Leader
Thank
of the
you,
Opposition.
Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for McNamara for his question. On the 28th of September 2022, I introduced a bill to establish a powerful, transparent and independent National Anti-Corruption Commission. On the same day, a Joint Select Committee was established to inquire into the bill. The committee called for submissions addressing the provisions of the bill and held 4 days of public hearings. Today, Dr Helen Haines, the member for Indi and the Deputy Chair of the committee, tabled its report in the House. I thank her and the Chair, Senator Linda White, and all of the members of the committee for their work on this report. I'm delighted that the committee, made up of government, opposition and crossbench members of both houses, has delivered a unanimous report today. This is the parliament at its finest, with members and senators coming together to find common ground and to find a constructive way forward. In doing so, they've respected the mandate given by the Australian people on the 21st of May to the Albanese government to establish a powerful, transparent and independent National Anti-Corruption Commission. This is the biggest single integrity reform this parliament has seen for decades. It is a key pillar in this government's plan to restore integrity, honesty and accountability to government. We will deliver on this key election commitment. Unlike the former government, which pledged to deliver a National Anti-Corruption Commission in December of 2018 and never delivered on that commitment, we are going to get this done. The government will now carefully consider this report and its recommendations ahead of the resumption of debate on the NAC bill in the next session of Parliament. We're determined to pass this legislation by year's end and have the Commission up and running by mid-2023. I call on all members of both the houses to engage constructively as this legislation works its way through the parliament. Multi-partisan support is the best way to ensure the long-term success of this body. Together, we can deliver the Australian people the highest standard of integrity that they called for at the last election and get this done.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition will cease those interjections. And I give the call to the member for Griffith.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer on the housing affordability crisis. Treasurer, using the standard definition of affordable housing as used by the Victorian Government, where a person on a low income pays no more than 30% of their income on rent or other housing costs, what proportion of the government's promised 1 million homes will be affordable, or will the vast majority of these homes be unaffordable homes built by private property developers?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I appreciate the question from the member for Griffith about the government's housing accord. The government's intention when it comes to the housing accord is to recognise extremely low vacancy rates and extremely high rents, and to try and do something about it so that more people can live closer to where the jobs and opportunities are. And so what we've done, as the member is aware, is we've brought together state and territory governments and local governments, the building industry, the super sector and other institutional investors to sign up to a target of affordable homes to be built, 1 million from 2024 to 2029, in the hope that by bringing people together and by providing an element of government co-investment, we can subsidise the rents, the rental returns for the builders, the community housing providers and the super funds to take something which is not appealing enough to investors, to make it a bit more appealing, but most importantly of all, to build more housing stock. As the member is aware, and I've heard the member talk about this on a number of occasions, we do have a problem in this country when it comes to the supply of affordable rental properties. And we are trying to do something about it. We do see a role for the Commonwealth, a leadership role for the Commonwealth in dealing with the problem that has been with us for too long. That's what the Housing Accord is all about, building more affordable properties, and that's what we intend to do.
Mr. Treasurer concluded his answer. I give the call to the member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. Earlier today, this House passed the Secure Jobs Better Pay Bill. How will the bill help get wages moving? What is the government's response to those who are trying to keep wages low?
Give the call to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, and I want to thank the member for Spence for the question, someone who has dedicated his life to secure jobs and better pay. Today the House made a few decisions. Today the House made a decision to get wages moving. Today the House made a decision to close the gender pay gap. Today the House made a decision to improve job security. And in doing those things, we also had another vote where there was an attempt for the House to make a different decision. Everyone in debate, throughout this debate, as it went back and forth in the House, often opened by saying everybody wants to get wages moving. We kept hearing from people on each side of the debate that they want to give people pay rises. And yet there's two tests. One, are you willing to do anything about it? And two, that we ended up with a vote that was designed to do the exact opposite. Now, in the lead-up to the last election, Senator Cash put out a statement saying there would be no changes to the Better Off Overall test, full stop. And I had presumed that those opposite had abandoned their previous position from the bill they brought in here in 2020, which was about pay cuts. A bill that was to redo the Better Off Overall test by getting rid of it altogether for 2 years. And yet today, in a motion moved by none other than the Leader of the Opposition, it said that they were calling on us to have changes to enterprise bargaining as outlined in the former coalition government's legislation introduced in 2020. So at the same time that this parliament was debating on the need to get wages moving with people facing higher inflation, those opposite took to a vote to bring back the 2020 legislation. What does it mean if you suspended the Better Off Overall test? It means a part-time level 2 hospitality worker aged over 21 could see their hourly New Year's Day rate slash from $46 to $20. Instead of earning $375, they would earn $166. A part-time level 3 retail worker aged over 21 could see their hourly Boxing Day rate slashed from $50 to $22. We had, at the exact time that people have been talking about cost of living pressures, we had a government determined to get wages moving and an opposition where they decided that keeping wages deliberately low as a deliberate design feature wasn't enough. They actually put back on the table a desire to suspend the Better Off Overall test altogether and deliver wage cuts. If you want to get wages moving, it's the government in this House that's on your side.
The minister's time has expired. I give the call for the member for Fairfax.
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. The budget projects that after 2 years of Labor's energy policies, gas prices will be up by 44%. Since the budget, government ministers have spoken about price caps, no price caps, direct assistance, no direct assistance, extra supply, limited supply, taxes on companies, no extra company taxes. Does the minister have any idea what he is doing, or is this just yet again Labor proving it doesn't know how to manage money, doesn't know how to manage the economy?
Order. Order. Members on my right, the member for Fairfax was heard in silence, and I'm asking the House, members on my right, I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Trying to take a statesman-like tone over here, Mr. Speaker, but it's rather hard when you get questions like that, Mr. Speaker. Questions from an opposition about gas prices and how much they're going up. When on the day the member for Hume became the Minister for Energy, gas was $9.40 a gigajoule, and at the time of the election it was $34.75, Mr. Speaker. A 270% increase. That's pretty good. Some would say that's fantastic, Mr. Speaker. Maybe the gas companies would say that's fantastic, but Australian consumers would not. The honourable member refers to work the government's doing to make sure that gas and energy price rises do not flow through to industries and Australian businesses. I thank him for bringing that to the attention of the House, and that work will continue.
Order. Members on my left, the member for O'Connor and the Leader of the Nationals will settle down, and I'll just give the call to the member for Holt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How does the budget and the Albanese Labor government's economic policies help Australians manage the cost of living without adding to inflation?
I give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Speaker. Can I thank the member for Holt for her question, but also for all of the work that she has done on behalf of the ordinary working people of this country before she came here and since she arrived here, and I pay tribute to her and her contribution. Mr. Speaker, Australians are under pressure from the rising costs of living, and governments need to strike the right balance between providing responsible cost of living relief without adding to inflation in our economy. This is a point that the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank was making earlier this afternoon at estimates when she described our approach as sensible and appropriate to the times that we confront. And because of this challenge, the budget provided cost of living relief in a responsible and targeted way, $7.5 billion across cheaper early childhood education, cheaper medicine, the expansion of paid parental leave, as well as a whole range of other measures around housing. But perhaps most important of all, Mr. Speaker, are getting wages moving again in our economy. And that is, as I said yesterday, a deliberate design feature of our economic policy. And that's why, again, in the budget, Mr. Speaker, there were policies so that people could train for higher wage opportunities. There was cheaper childcare so that parents can work more and earn more if they want to, Mr. Speaker. There were investments in industries where the secure, well-paid jobs of the future will come from. And there was also, of course, Mr. Speaker, and we saw this today with the passage through the House of the Minister for Industrial Relations legislation, we have put our back into making sure that whether it's across all those areas I nominated in the budget or also in industrial relations, that we are getting wages moving again in this country. For too long in Australia, Mr. Speaker, wages growth has been stagnant. For too long, wages growth has been too low. For too long in this country, ordinary working people who make the biggest contribution to our national prosperity have not been getting the reward that they deserve for their efforts. For too long in this country and in this economy, ordinary working people have been copping it in the neck at the same time as profits have been rising. And so what we want to see in this country, Mr. Speaker, what we want to see in this country, Mr. Speaker, is everybody getting just reward for their efforts so that when we grow our economy, Australian working people get a slice of the action. That's what the legislation that passed through here this morning was all about. That's what the budget was all about, and that's what this government is all about.
Give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. At a time when Australia urgently needs more gas supply, why has the government funded $9.8 million over 4 years to activists who oppose and stop new gas projects?
I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
We have not.
Give the call to the member for order. Members on my left. I give the call to the member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Social Services. How will the Albanese Labor government's paid parental leave changes provide cost of living support for new families? How will the policy changes help Australian families?
Great question. I give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Adelaide for his question. As a fierce advocate for families in his electorate, I know he has welcomed the government's paid parental leave changes. Of course, the Albanese government has made cost of living relief a priority in this recent budget. It focuses on keeping money in the pockets of Australians. Of course, our budget is delivering cheaper medicines, cheaper childcare and, of course, our plan to get wages moving again. But, of course, families are front and centre of this budget, in particular helping them ease the burden of juggling care and work. And that's why we are investing in expand paid parental leave that will be boosted to 6 months by 2026. This will increase support available to families by almost $5,000 and will help take some of the pressure off household budgets, and our measures will encourage the sharing of care responsibilities between both parents. Paid parental leave that encourages sharing of care was one of the most prominent calls at our most recent Jobs and Skills Summit. We know that shared caring responsibilities does promote gender equality in this country. But we also know, Speaker, that this helps many dads who want to take time off work following the birth or adoption of a child. I recently met with Alex Edgar at West Beach Kindergarten, who talked about how important our paid parental leave changes will be for dads and mums. He said, "Recently, I changed employer because my wife is pregnant, we're having a third child, and I wanted to access gender-neutral paid parental leave through my employer. It's very impressive the government has made these changes and listened to Australian dads who overwhelmingly want to be able to take leave. The current arrangements for shared care of children isn't working. We know that only half of dads are accessing dad and partner pay. That is why we're reforming the paid parental leave system so there is greater uptake of shared care of children between mums and dads, making it easier for dads to take paid parental leave by removing the current barriers and making it more flexible in when and how parents take care." Now, Speaker, we are making a real difference to advance the way paid parental leave works for families. And this is in stark contrast to those opposite who, when in government, wanted to take the scheme back in time.
The Minister for Social Services will resume her seat. Call the Manager of Opposition Business.
Speaker, on relevance, you have directed a minister back to the question previously when they've strayed. The minister was doing quite well. She managed to stay on. She managed to stay on the government's own record, but for the last, we got to 30 seconds to go. She just couldn't resist. She couldn't resist. She should be directed back to.
Thank you for the point. The question was about what the government has done to provide cost of living support to families, and I invite the minister to conclude her answer.
Of course, what we're not doing is limiting parents in the leave that they can take by saying you only get to choose your employer leave or your government leave, because that, as the Human Rights Commission said, was a regressive measure that was inconsistent with Australians' human rights obligations. We will not do that, even if those on the other side decided to.
I give the call to the member for Bass.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Small Business. Have any small business groups met with the minister to raise concerns about the government's Industrial Relations Bill?
Give a call to the Minister for Small Business, Minister for Housing and the Minister for Homelessness.
And I thank the member for Bass for her question. I do meet with small businesses and small business representatives on a regular basis and discuss a range of matters, as we always do, because what we actually want to do is work with people and bring people together, and that's what we've been doing.
Order. Order. Members on my left. The Minister for Resources will cease interjecting, so I can hear from the member for Jagga Jagga.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How will the Albanese Labor government's ambitious housing reform agenda in the budget address cost of living pressures?
I give the call to the Minister for Small Business, the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Homelessness.
And I thank the member for Jagga Jagga for her question, because I know that she, like many people on this side of the House, are concerned that too many Australians don't have a safe, affordable place to call home. Indeed, we are committed to addressing cost of living pressures with our 5-point plan in the budget, and one of those, of course, is around our ambitious housing reform. Of course, we know that far too many Australians are finding it difficult to rent a property, and far too many Australians are finding it difficult to go into their own home and to purchase a property. And that's why we are acting immediately. That's why we're unlocking up to $575 million from our National Housing Infrastructure Facility, and that these funds will be available before Christmas for more social and affordable homes as quickly as we can get them off the ground. And of course, as part of our budget, we struck the new National Housing Accord between the three tiers of government, between investors, industry and social housing providers.
Member for Deakin will cease
and as we heard
interjecting.
in estimates yesterday, Treasury officials confirmed that our ambition to build 1 million well-located homes from 2024 is more than would substantially have been without our policies. So it's actually important that we have done this.
The member for
It
Deakin
is very, very
will cease
important that we have
interjecting.
done this, as well as our $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund that will provide 30,000 social and affordable homes across the country. And of course our National Housing Supply and Affordability Council that will provide advice
Member for Moncrieff,
in terms of the
Deputy
National
Leader of
Housing
the
Accord,
Opposition.
but also in terms of the returns from the Australia Future Fund and the housing. Our National Housing and Homelessness Plan will set out concrete actions to help the Accord's goals. And of course, the Regional First Home Buyer Guarantee is already helping hundreds of Australians in regional Australia into their first home.
The member for
We did
Deakin
bring this forward by 3
will
months.
cease interjecting.
Indeed, in less than 6 weeks now, we have 686 families in regional Australia who've saved thousands of dollars by accessing this Regional First Home Buyer Guarantee. Both the guarantee and our Help to Buy program will deliver savings on housing costs, and these programs are targeted to those most in need. We did hear in Senate estimates yesterday, when we're talking about housing affordability and social housing, a senator from the opposition makes some disparaging comments about people in social housing and about social housing generally. And I'd say to Australians who are growing up in social housing or on a social housing waiting list, we do care. We understand that Australians, all Australians, need secure and affordable housing, which is why we have such an ambitious housing agenda. We're getting on with it. We'll continue to work with our state and territory colleagues, with local governments, with investors and with the sector to deliver.
Give the call. Members on my left. Give the call to the member for Mayo.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Last week I met with Darren and Vicky, pensioners from my electorate. Vicky has a lung disease but cancelled her last medical appointment because she couldn't afford it. Every day I'm hearing from constituents who can no longer access a doctor as medical practices are ceasing bulk billing in Mayo, leaving many constituents sick and untreated. What is the government doing about this crisis?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Mayo for her question. I know how deeply concerned she is about the state of general practice, in particular in her electorate. I've talked to her about that, and I appreciate the way in which she's engaging with the government on health policy as well as policy more broadly. And, Mr Speaker, I share the member's concerns, not just in relation to our state of South Australia, but the nation more broadly. I've said that I think general practice is in the worst shape it's been in the almost 40-year history of Medicare. And all of the trends in general practice, Mr Speaker, are bad. The member talks about bulk billing rates, which the former government used to come to this dispatch box regularly and pretend we're at record levels. We're going terrifically well when we know the reality could not be more different. We know that bulk billing rates have been dropping. We know, I suspect every member of this interjections from the former Minister for Health are ironic, to say the least. I suspect every member of this House is talking to GPs and patients who say that bulk billing rates are plummeting in their area. GPs who tell them how distressed they are at having to change their bulk billing policies. We know that about 1 in 3 Australians pay a gap fee in this country, and those gap fees have skyrocketed. Now, for the first time in the history of Medicare, the average gap fee for a standard GP consult is more than the Medicare rebate itself. Patients are paying more out of their own pocket than Medicare contributes to a standard GP consult. And it's not just bulk billing rates and gap fees, Mr Speaker. We know there's a workforce crisis in general practice, with fewer and fewer medical graduates choosing to go into general practice. And, Mr Speaker, it's no mystery why, and it's no mystery who in this country bears more responsibility than anyone else for the parlous state of general practice. It's the now Leader of the Opposition, who tried to ram through a tax that would make every Australian pay a fee for every consult in general practice, and when he couldn't do that, froze the Medicare rebate for 6 long years.
The Minister for Health and Aged Care will resume his seat. I call the member for Mayo on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On a point of order, I ask the government what are they doing to address this crisis.
The point of order was on relevance, and I draw the minister back to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, I'm not going to pretend that it's going to be a quick or an easy job to fix up 9 long years of cuts and neglect. But in our first budget, instead of a GP tax and raising the cost of medicines, we've already invested $160 million in a rural general practice package. We've invested more than $220 million to strengthen general practice grants, which will be rolling out over coming weeks and months. And only last week again, I met with the Strengthening Medicare Task Force to advise the government on our investment of $250 million each and every year to strengthen Medicare, because, Mr Speaker, and to the member for Mayo, rest assured this government has no higher priority than rebuilding general practice.
Give the call to the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. What was the former coalition's legacy in defence, and what is the Albanese Labor government's plan to fix this?
Give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Well, I thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for her question. The defence legacy of the 10 years of the former coalition government is one of manifest failure, and it started with themselves. 7 defence ministers in the course of 9 years. Johnson, Andrews, Payne, Pine, Reynolds. To be honest, I think I got that wrong on Tuesday, but this just gets so confusing. And then Dutton. I could go through the whole 24.
The Deputy Prime Minister will refer to members by their correct titles.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I could go through the whole 24 who served across the defence portfolio, but to do so would run against the time limits of answering questions. Suffice to say that we saw everyone from Chobo to Chester, from Andrew G to Andrew Hastie.
Order. The Deputy Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition will resume his seat. Less than 20 seconds ago, I asked the Minister, former ministers I have no responsibility for. I asked current members to be acknowledged by their correct titles.
I'm sorry, Mr Speaker. The seat name spoiled my alliteration. I will continue. Little wonder that what resulted from all of this was complete chaos. It is hard to think of how the coalition could have treated defence with more contempt. I mean, they regarded ministerial jobs in the defence portfolio as like a ride at the show. Literally everybody got to go, but the chaos affected real people. Now, yesterday, one member of the not-so-exclusive Liberal former Defence Ministers Club Senator Reynolds started talking about valleys of death. And to be clear, those opposite are experts in valleys of death after program ground to a halt. We saw the Hunter-class frigates run 4 years over time, offshore patrol vessels a year over time, the Evolved Cape-class vessels another year over time. The Albanese Labor government is absolutely committed to managing defence procurement properly. We get that defence projects are large, they're complex, sometimes not everything goes right, which is why we're going to have objective criteria for defence programs to end up on the projects of interest, projects of concern list. And when they do, ministers are going to receive monthly reports so that those ministers can put those projects back on track, and we are going to have an independent project office within the Department of Defence. In short, we are going to manage defence procurement properly so that we have value for money for Australian taxpayers, because it's not just how much you spend on defence, it is the quality of that spend which will build the capabilities for this country, which will keep Australians safe.
Give a call to the member for Nichols.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. I refer to the $9.3 billion in delayed or cancelled infrastructure funding in the budget, including $208 million already committed to by the Coalition to the Stage 1 of the Goulburn Valley Highway bypass of Shepparton. Will the government guarantee funding for Stage 1 of the Shepparton bypass, or has Labor simply abandoned regional Victoria?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much for your question, and I know the member means well in asking that question. But this government has inherited an absolute mess when it comes to the infrastructure investment pipeline. The infrastructure investment pipeline, this government is investing $123 billion over the next 10 years, increasing funding to regional communities by over $4 billion over the next 10 years. I'm very proud of that investment. But what we have inherited from this previous government and the mess that I had to clean up are projects that are undercooked, underfunded and simply under-deliverable. And I can give you example after example of projects where they are billions of dollars underfunded, where there was no information provided to the state governments before the previous government decided to go out and announce funding.
The minister will pause 1 minute in, and I will hear from the Leader of the Nationals and ask him to state the point of order.
On relevance, Mr Speaker, the question was very tight about a specific project, the Shepparton bypass, $208 million. There has been a big prelude here. It's been very tight, and the minister needs to come back to the question.
Hear from the Leader of the House.
To the point of order, I thought the question finished with a full reference to regional Victoria.
The question did mention the bypass order. I'm trying to rule on the Leader of the National's point of order. The minister has the call.
Thank you. Well, I was actually asked about projects under the infrastructure investment pipeline, including projects in regional Victoria, to which I am referring. And that is an absolute mess. So the money for the Shepparton bypass remains in the budget, and we are fully committed to that project. That remains in the budget. But this is typical of what the previous government did. All announcement and not able to deliver the projects. Right. Completely underfunded, undercooked and under-deliverable, because the previous government went out, you were more interested in getting an announcement in the papers, putting a press release out. You can't drive on a press release, you can't actually build a road if you don't actually have enough money for it. And that is the problem. The legacy that you have left is of undercooked, underfunded and under-deliverable projects because you mismanaged the infrastructure investment pipeline.
Give the call. Order. I give the call to the member for Fraser.
My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. How is the Albanese Labor government changing lives by making medicines cheaper for millions of Australians?
I give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for Fraser for his question. I know how hard he campaigned at the last election on strengthening Medicare and delivering cheaper medicines. And at the budget last month, Mr Speaker, our government delivered on that promise, cheaper medicines. Even before that, just a few months ago, back in July, the safety net threshold for millions of pensioners and concession card holders in Australia was slashed by 25%, meaning that across the year, those millions of Australians know that they will pay no more than $4.70 per week for all of their medicines needs. In September, the price of more than 2,000 different brands of medicines was also cut, delivering around $130 million in cash to hard-working Australian patients. And last month, tens of thousands of self-funded retirees gained access for the first time to seniors' health cards, which will see their medicine bills plummet as well. But, Mr Speaker, there is still more to come, because on the 1st of January, this government will deliver the biggest cut to the price of medicines in the 75-year history of the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme, bringing the maximum co-payment for general patients down from $42.50 to just $30, putting around $200 million each and every year back into the pockets of hard-working general patients. And, Mr Speaker, this is not just good for their hip pocket at a time of huge pressure on household budgets, it's also good for their health. And that's what hundreds of thousands of asthma and other chronic lung disease sufferers are going to experience on the 1st of January. And we've already been hearing from a number of them who will see a big cut to the price of their inhalers like Symbicort and Seretide. Bella, who's just 23, wrote to us and said, as a newlywed fresh out of uni, it's a strange thing having to pick between breathing properly and having savings in the bank. A price drop in Symbicort will make all the difference to my life, and as well as countless other Australians. Lindsay, who's a mum from St Mary's in New South Wales, wrote to us and said, this is great news. I use Seretide daily and have been struggling with the cost. I was reducing my dose to make it last longer, but this will help me a lot financially. And Karen from Victoria said, I often pay around $200 a month for all of my asthma medication. This reduction in the price of Symbicort will be life-changing. Mr Speaker, our delivery on our promise to deliver responsible cost of living relief to Australians is making a real difference.
I give the call to the member for Warringah.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, COP27 is currently bringing together world leaders to address climate change. The planet has already warmed by 1.2 degrees, with escalating climate-induced disasters and cost-crippling communities. Yet current pledges, including your government's inadequate 43% by 2030, have us on track for 3 degrees of warming. Will your government stop making the problem worse by funding and approving further fossil fuel projects?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question and for her genuine engagement on the issue of climate change since she has arrived in this parliament as the member for Warringah. As the member pointed out, though, in the preamble to her question, she spoke about what was happening at COP27 and spoke about the global effort, because indeed climate change does require a global effort. And one of the things that has occurred already at COP27 is that the previous chair of COP, the person who chaired the Glasgow conference and was the minister for the Conference of the Parties as part of the UK Conservative government, has welcomed Australia back as part of the global effort, as have all of the delegates, as occurred at NATO, as did Prime Minister Johnson, Prime Minister Truss, President Biden, Prime Minister Kishida, Prime Minister Modi. The fact is that Australia has been welcomed back due to the fact that we changed, as one of our first acts, our nationally determined contribution to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And we did that with the commitment that we took to the election of 43% by 2030 reduction as part of our commitment to have a pathway to net zero by 2050. Australia has fallen behind where we should be because we've had a decade of denial, a decade of delay. We didn't have any climate policy, and reluctantly, when the former government adopted not really a target because they weren't prepared to legislate it, net zero by 2050, there was no policy to go with it. This government understands that we need to deal with energy policy, transport policy, housing policy. We need to make homes more efficient. We need to change the makeup of our transport network in accordance with what's happening around the world, and we need to move to the cheapest and cleanest form of new energy, which is renewables. We need to do that in partnership as well with the rest of the world. And I look forward to, in coming days, meeting with global leaders, talking about how we cooperate. I know that when I've spoken in recent days in the lead-up to the G20 with people like Prime Minister Sunak of the UK, but also in the past few days with the leaders of Vietnam, Thailand, other nations in our region, the first thing that they raise is climate change. And I am optimistic. I am optimistic that the world can move. I want Australia to be a part of that, and my government's commitment is to do just that.
Member for Griffith will cease interjecting. I'll give the call to the member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development. How will last month's budget deliver much-needed investment in infrastructure for regional and remote communities across the country?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thanks. Can I thank the member for Hunter for his question and congratulate him on his incredible advocacy for his community. Indeed, next week I'm going to look forward to visiting the member's electorate and hearing firsthand how this government's investment in important projects like the Muswellbrook Bypass and Mandalong Road will affect his community. In particular, I'm pleased with the Coulsons Creek Road. The member for New England, I know, is something that he feels very dearly about. The repairs, another important project with the route between Willow Tree and Merriwa Creek, currently closed and completely impassable. The project has been entirely funded by the Albanese Labor government, not something the previous government funded. It's an important local freight road and it will see locals saving hours every week once complete. I'm also looking forward to visiting the member for Robertson's electorate, where the government's funded Avoca Drive and $40 million towards local roads along the Central Coast. Last week I was very lucky to spend time with the member for Lingiari, visiting communities that she represents in Alice Springs and across Central Australia. It was a privilege to spend time with locals at Yuendamu, a remote Indigenous community some 300 kilometres from Alice. As we flew in, we saw firsthand how important good road connections are to such a remote community. Locals rely on roads for food, health, education and access to recreation available in Alice, and that's why our budget delivers an extra $350 million of additional funding to continue upgrading to the Tanami Road, a really important road, as well as also funding the Central Arnhem Road, bringing the total commitment for the Northern Territory to over $740 million. As we travel down the most recently completed section of the road, and I'd encourage, if anyone gets the opportunity to do it, it is just terrific. We see the dirt on one side, the freshly laid tarmac on the other, a new, stronger and more reliable backbone for the communities of Central Australia. When I visited the work camp and the crew of Exact Contracting to see the incredible operations that an important Territory company is doing, and coming to terms, I particularly want to mention coming to terms with the loss of their founder, the fabulous Greg Rhodes. I sent my sympathies to Greg's wife Jenny, who was with us on the trip, who I spent some time with throughout the day. They are a terrific Territory company and they're doing really fantastic work on sealing the Tanami. Of course, our budget also delivered another $200 million of funding for the Northern Territory for remote roads, and that brings the total package of up to $382 million for remote communities. These are some of the poorest and most disadvantaged communities in our country. This is important investment in infrastructure and something I'm very proud that the Albanese Labor government is delivering.
I'll give the call to the member for New England.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Veterans Affairs on the eve of Remembrance Day. I refer to Labor's election announcement on the 24th of April 2022, which clearly stated they would deliver, and I quote, 10 new veteran hubs. Last night, in Senate estimates, they confirmed they'll only deliver 8 new veterans hubs. So, does this mean that on the eve of Remembrance Day, this is a clear indication that they have dishonoured their commitment and a clear example of the lack of effect by not having a Veterans Affairs Minister in the Cabinet?
The call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Minister for Defence Personnel.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his very important question about our Veterans and Families Hubs, which are a very important initiative about supporting our veterans and families, defence personnel as they transition out of defence. And as we've seen so clearly through the Royal Commission into defence and veteran suicide, it is vitally important that we as a government on behalf of our nation are able to provide the services that our veterans and their families deserve to receive in a coordinated way, and providing that accessibility, especially in areas where we're seeing high concentrations of veterans in community. And part of the process that we are undertaking in rolling out these Veterans and Families Hubs is engaging with those veterans communities to make sure that—
The member for Cowper will cease interjecting.
To make sure that those hubs meet the needs of those communities of veterans and families that they will be servicing. It's not a cookie-cutter approach that we are taking. But we were very clear in the commitment—
Cowper is warned.
We were very clear, Mr Speaker, we were very clear in the commitment that we took to the election.
The member for Cowper, excuse me. Pause a moment, Minister. The member for Cowper will leave the chamber under 94A. Continual yelling is not acceptable. I'm calling the minister back to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And those opposite draw attention to something that I think they have had a great misunderstanding about the incompetence of their own government over the last 9 years, wherein the government previously never made any specific funding commitments to any location about new hubs to be delivered. They might have identified—
The minister will pause, and I will hear from the manager.
Mr Speaker, yet again we have a minister who can't stop himself from going onto the record of the previous government. It's relevant.
Resume your seat. You don't have the call. The manager does not have the call. I give him the call so he could rise to his feet and say what point of order he is taking. If he doesn't do that, I can't make a ruling. Call the minister back to the question.
Thank you, Speaker. As I was trying to point out, given the clear interest from those opposite in this issue, the previous government did not fund any specific locations for new hubs. We were very clear in the commitment that we took forward at the election, which we have a mandate to deliver on, the locations of the hubs that we would be moving forward with, the 10 hubs, which included 2 hubs that the previous government had discussed but not delivered on. We were always clear about that. There was no great secret unveiled last night. But what we have been clear about, we have now gone to market after the delivery of the fantastic budget by the Treasurer only a few weeks ago. We are now going to communities and consulting with them, calling for their feedback and input so that they can engage with us about what they would like to see in the hubs in their communities, how they would like to see that support for veterans and families to meet their needs. Because the needs of veterans in community is different from place to place. We recognise that. And we want to engage with those communities so we can make sure that they get the services that they deserve. And as has been made very clear in this government's response to the interim report of the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide, we are committed on delivering a better future for defence personnel, veterans and families.
Give the call to the member for Solomon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to better assist our emergency services in protecting the lives of Australians in times of crisis or emergency? Thank you.
I'll give the call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Solomon for his question. On the eve of Remembrance Day, I acknowledge his service to our country in our armed services. It is a tragic fact, Mr Speaker, that each year in Australia around 30,000 people go missing. Many of these people are found, but devastatingly, some will never be seen again. As we know, the first few hours and days of when a person goes missing are the most crucial when searching for them. And that's why today the Albanese government introduced legislation to strengthen emergency services capabilities to locate missing persons. Last month, the New South Wales Deputy State Coroner wrote to me outlining recommendations stemming from a coronial inquest. The inquest was in relation to the tragic findings of the presumed death of a missing person. In her Honour's letter, the coroner recommended the removal of a barrier in the Telecommunications Act for emergency services using technology to locate missing persons. 3 weeks after that correspondence, today I brought legislation to this House to address the very issue raised by Her Honour. As it currently stands, for law enforcement to request access to an individual's data, the situation must meet the threshold of a serious and imminent threat to a person's life or health. This set the bar too high. In most circumstances, emergency services were unable to reach this threshold and lost a valuable tool in responding swiftly to someone in need. Unfortunately, this is not the first time this issue has been raised. The Australian Law Reform Commission and past coronial inquests have identified these limitations. This amendment removes the imminence threshold. If emergency services believe there is a serious threat to a person's life or health, assistance may be requested and granted. This bill also ensures that the privacy of Australians is balanced against emergency services requirements, with provision for further oversight over telecommunications data disclosure. To this end, these proposed changes clarify that it is law enforcement that decides the seriousness of the threat rather than the carriers. And it's important to note that these laws can only be used in specific circumstances where it's considered impracticable or impossible to obtain a person's consent to their data being shared. Mr Speaker, this is an important proposed change to the way we deliver emergency services to Australians. The Telecommunications Legislation Amendment, Information Disclosure, National Interest and Other Measures Bill is targeted to not only improve the operation and transparency of the relationship between law enforcement and telcos, but crucially to save lives. I would hope that all members of this House and the other place recognise the urgency of this legislative amendment. Even if just one life is saved through these changes, it will be a worthy cause. It is based on sound and thorough consultation, and I look forward to this bill being passed expeditiously.
Give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, I join with the Minister in firstly congratulating her on this initiative, something the Coalition strongly supports. It's a very important area of public policy, and we will lend our full support to it. At the beginning of her remarks, the Minister acknowledged the member for his service and us. The fact that we're on the eve of Remembrance Day, I do want to say to all of the veterans in this place, firstly, thank you for your service, not just the member that was mentioned, but also the members for Canning, Braddon, Herbert, Fadden, Menzies and Leichhardt, and those in the other place as well. But to all of those veterans who will be commemorating Remembrance Day, to all of those family members that treat this as a very significant day in their own lives, given the history within their own families, it is important that we recognise their service to keep our country safe, not just in generations past, but for generations future as well.
Give the call to the member for Deakin.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Housing. Goldman Sachs chief economist Andrew Bogue says the cash rate will rise 5 more times to 4.1% over the next 6 months, one of many financial institutions to upgrade their forecasts following your budget. Isn't this proof that the budget was a missed opportunity that failed to deliver on the government's promises, the Prime Minister's promises, of cheaper mortgages for Australian families?
Give the call to the Minister for Small Business, the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Homelessness.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And as the member opposite well knows, interest rates are rising, and they started rising under the former government back in May because of what has occurred prior to the election, because of them. And in terms of our Help to Buy scheme, which the member is clearly referring to. That is a government equity scheme which we will be moving quickly to get up and running to make sure that Australians do have an opportunity to get into a home. And we're talking about 30% of government equity, up to 30% for existing homes and up to 40% for new homes that will be available under the Help to Buy scheme.
The minister will resume. The minister has concluded her answer. And I give the call to the member for Newcastle. Order. Members on my left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Leader of the Nationals is on a warning. The member for Newcastle has the call and will be heard in silence.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What will be the impact of the additional university places announced in the budget?
The call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the member for Newcastle for her question. We have skill shortages right across the country, and a lot of those skills are forged in our universities. It's why we committed in the campaign to fund an extra 20,000 university places. That funding's in the budget. It's a $500 million investment. And a couple of weeks ago I announced the breakup of those 20,000 places. It includes funding for more than 4,000 teachers, 2,500 nurses, 1,700 extra engineers and more than 2,000 more IT professionals. And today, data came out that advised us that today more than 44% of young people in their 20s and 30s have a university degree. That's a good thing. But not if your parents are poor, not if you come from regional Australia or the more remote parts of Australia. Only 20% of people from poor backgrounds have a uni degree, only 20% of people from regional Australia. It's even lower if you're an Indigenous Australian. Only 7% of Indigenous Australians have a uni degree. So as I spoke to Vice-Chancellors about these 20,000 places, one Vice-Chancellor said to me, Minister, why don't you allocate 5,000 of the 20,000 to the groups that are underrepresented at university? And I thought, why don't we allocate all of them? And that's what we did. The universities that got the biggest share of these are Newcastle University, Charles Darwin University, Wollongong, Curtin, Edith Cowan, Adelaide, Victoria University, Queensland University of Technology, Charles Sturt and Southern Cross. We need more teachers, we need more nurses, we need more engineers, but we also need to make sure that our universities are ready for the next decade and beyond. And that's what the Universities Accord will be all about. Be a big and broad review of our higher education system, the first since Denise Bradley did that work almost 15 years ago. And next week I'll announce the team that will lead that work and their terms of reference. And one of the big issues that I want them to look at is this. How do we open the doors of opportunity that the Prime Minister talked about on election night to more Australians? This is a start. The 20,000 places are a start, but there's a lot more work to do.
Give a call to the member for Bowman.
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. I refer to soaring concern amongst Australians on the spiralling cost of living occurring under the government's watch, including surveys today showing more Australians are concerned about having to pay more for everything and rightly believe the government is doing nothing to address these concerns. Why is the government still refusing to act to reduce the cost of living almost 6 months since they've been elected, instead delivering a budget that baked in electricity price rising by 56% and gas prices by 44% over 2 years?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
I thank the honourable member for his question about what the government did in the budget in relation to energy prices and cost of living. And I'm more than happy to answer the question because the budget provided $20 billion of funding to ensure that we rewire this country, Mr Speaker. After years of indolence over there, who talked about the Marinus Link for 10 years, Mr Speaker, in our first 6 months, the Prime Minister and this government made the Marinus Link a reality by working with Tasmania and Victoria to fund it, Mr Speaker, because talking about a link does not move 1 watt of electricity around this country. Funding a link does. That's what we did. We also, Mr Speaker, funded our 400 community batteries across Australia, which will help families store the renewable energy that they generate and to use it at a time and a place convenient to them, because batteries store renewable energy, something the Leader of the Opposition has some trouble coming to terms with. The Leader of the Opposition was on radio this morning on 2GB being interviewed by Ray Hadley, where the Leader of the Opposition always goes to get his toughest questions, and he said this morning, you can't store the renewable energy at the moment. That's what the Leader of the Opposition said. The battery was invented by Alessandro Volta in 1800, Mr Speaker, but the Leader of the Opposition is still catching up with this fact. He still doesn't understand that just because the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, nor does the rain always fall, but we manage to store water, Mr Speaker. We manage to drink water when it's not raining.
Minister for Climate Change
it reminded me of the former
resume his seat. The member for Bowman, I'm going to ask him
Speaker,
to state the point of order.
Relevance. I didn't ask for a history lesson. My question related to cost of living.
You did ask a very broad question about the cost of living and the cost of energy and reports today. So I'll ask the minister to continue. He is being in order, and I'll.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We don't have to go back too far to be reminded of the former Prime Minister, who also happens to be the former Minister for Energy, Mr Speaker, the member for Cook, who said a big battery was as useful as a big prawn. Nothing has changed over there, Mr Speaker. The former Prime Minister didn't get it. The current Leader of the Opposition doesn't get it. They don't really get renewable energy. They don't understand that renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy. They pay lip service to renewable energy, but they just hate all the policies that actually deliver renewable energy, Mr Speaker. They hate our Rewiring the Nation policy. They hate our community batteries policy. They hate the real policies which actually bring these things on, which will provide cost of living relief to Australians, which will get more renewable energy, because at the end of the day, Mr Speaker, you can change the face on the picture, but it's just the same old Liberal Party that the Australian people rejected on May 22nd.
Give the call to the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. What upcoming international summits will the Prime Minister be attending, and how will this enhance Australia's security and our economy?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Werriwa for her question, and tomorrow after I attend the Remembrance Day commemorations at Martin Place in Sydney, I'll be travelling to the ASEAN Australia Summit and the East Asia Summit in Cambodia, which will then be followed by the G20 Bali Summit in Indonesia and then the APEC Economic Leaders Summit in Thailand. During the next 9 days, there will be a series of direct bilateral meetings as well have been lined up, including with the new UK Prime Minister and our other friends. The Indo-Pacific is absolutely critical to regional prosperity and security and to the future of our nation. And that's why I'm particularly pleased to have accepted President Widodo's invitation to be one of the 3 speakers, along with himself as chair of the current G20, Prime Minister Modi as the next incoming chair of the G20, and myself at the B20 meeting that will be attended by the leaders of Australian businesses, including the heads of ACCI, the BCA and the Australian Industry Group. These conferences come at a critical time. We know that the global financial outlook is stark. We know that we have rising inflation throughout the world. We know that geostrategic tensions are intensifying, and we've seen the impact of climate change globally as well. And one of the many truths that the pandemic made clear is that what happens in the rest of the world matters here at home as well. And that, unfortunately, has been driven home as well by the global impact of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Even though that's half a world away, Australian families are feeling the impact here. And the Australian government, in a bipartisan way, I must say, has been supportive and will continue to support the heroic struggle of the people of Ukraine against this trashing of international law. Supply chain breakdowns across the world mean Australians are seeing, though, price spikes and shortages. We must work together with our international partners to tackle inflation, to tackle skills shortages, to tackle climate change. That's how we can grow our economy at home and promote stability in our region. We're showing, Mr Speaker, that Australia is back as a partner and as a leader, bringing a calm, mature and collaborative approach to international relations and standing up for Australia's interests wherever and whenever we need to. We will be raising issues of Australia's national interest at these meetings. The Treasurer will be joining me at the B20 and for the beginning of the G20 in Indonesia as well. And I congratulate President Widodo, our friend, for the work that he has done in organising this important international summit, which is an important recognition of the standing that Indonesia has as it rises, along with India, to be in the top 5 economies in the world over coming decades. And on that note, Mr Speaker, I'd ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
And I call the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. On indulgence, earlier—
Order. The member for Hume.
It's the first time he's spoken all questions.
And the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Earlier today, I had the great honour of travelling to Sydney to farewell at Rookwood Cemetery Christine May Meader. Christine May Meader was a former Citizen of the Year for my local community. She was a librarian and historian of the inner west of Marrickville. She knows more about it than anyone on earth. And over a long career in the local community, she was very much a loved member of the community, which is why she had such an extraordinary large farewell. This morning I thank the Leader of the Opposition for agreeing for a pair today so I could pay my respects. We're all here as local members first in order to represent ourselves in this place, and we all know that there are people in our own communities who are just very, very special, who don't ask for anything, who just work for the local community. Chris Meader used to do walking tours of our local community, one of which we had the police arrive because there was something like 400 people turned up to hear about the history of South Marrickville. She was an extraordinary person, a very warm and generous human being. I pay my respects to her family and her friends today, and I honour her memory.
Following an incident earlier today, and for the benefit of all members, and in particular for all new members, I want to remind members the procedures for when the attention of the Speaker or Deputy Speaker is drawn to the state of the House and the Speaker observes that a quorum is not present. Standing Order 56D is clear. No member may leave the chamber while the bells are ringing or until a quorum is present. I understand the member for Fairfax has indicated he'd like the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and my apologies to the House and my thanks to you for your wise counsel in that regard. It's also a little bit embarrassing when quorum is called immediately after you've given a speech, because it indicates there weren't many people in the House listening to your speech. Now, I want to assure the member for Moreton there was certainly no offence to you who spoke after me, as I left the House in a rush, and therefore I make that apology. Thank you, Mr.
I thank the member for Fairfax. The member for Lalor is claiming to be misrepresented.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I seek leave to make a personal explanation.
Do you claim to be misrepresented?
I do, most grievously,
you may
Mr
proceed.
Speaker. Today, in the 90-second statements, the member for Latrobe referred to me as the member for Lalor. This is a
Order. Order. The member for Latrobe is on a warning, and
Keep going.
The member for Lalor has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This not only misrepresents me, it misrepresents my entire community. The name of the seat I represent is Lalor. And the member for Latrobe needs to understand that in Melbourne, where he's from, there's a suburb that's referred to as Lalor. It's nowhere near my seat. I'm tired of the confusion between Lalor and Scullin, where lay law exists. Further, Mr Speaker, the member for Latrobe said that I simply don't care about vulnerable communities, particularly communities of faith. The member for Latrobe may want to read an article that was in the Australia Today where the temple he was referring to says, I have visited it twice. And
the member for
he would
Lalor will come to
I have one more point to make, Mr Speaker.
Briefly.
I would further give evidence that this is a misrepresentation, because if the member for Latrobe would like to check the budget, he will find that Labor is supporting the Wyndham Multi-Faith Network in this year's budget, Deputy Speaker.
Order. Order. I just called the Leader of the House with papers.
Speaker, documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to honourable members earlier today. Full details of the documents will be recorded in the votes and proceedings.